From Proverbs, chapter 2. My child, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments within you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. If you indeed cry out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures, you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. And from Luke chapter 2. We read quite a bit of Luke chapter 2 just a couple of nights ago on Christmas Eve, and here we have some more. Now every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. And then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. It's one of my favorite lines that Luke repeats. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. Here ends this morning's reading.
It's interesting, Marc pointed that out about held all these things and treasured them in her heart. When I was in seminary and I was 25 years old, I finally had to take a preaching class. I was good with all the rest of it, but preaching? I just didn't see myself in that role. So I went to class and we were given assignments, and my very first sermon I ever preached on was, "And Mary kept all these things and pondered them in her heart." Although I've kind of kept that one as kind of my beginning. The word for wisdom in Hebrew is chokmah. Chokmah is found in a variety of contexts in the Old Testament and is used very frequently, hundreds of times. It's difficult to translate exactly what the Hebrews meant by the word wisdom or chokmah for our own culture and time. But then isn't that the way it's supposed to be? Shouldn't this be a challenge and a focus of our lives in each generation, this search for wisdom, this understanding of wisdom? Wisdom is evasive to one who seeks it only in a rigid formalization of truth. It can feel something like trying to grasp a slippery tomato seed between your teeth. Remember, I grew up in the country. We entertained ourselves in interesting ways. Wisdom can't be fully captured in black ink on a white page. Wisdom comes alive in our lived experience of which we refuse to remain stubbornly unconscious, but which we embrace. Experienced experience, which we let touch us with its elusive beauty and truth. In chokmah, we find joy and purpose, and we come to understand what is essential to a full and sacred life. In the gospel story for today, we find the only story of Jesus's this phase between birth and his adulthood. We find one story of Jesus as a young boy, and this is it. In the gospel story for today, we see Mary and Joseph after a full day's journey, and they notice that Jesus is not among their group of travelers, and they head back to Jerusalem to look for their young son. Obviously, they're anxious, and upon finding him sitting calmly listening to teachers in the temple, what else do you imagine they might have been? Irritated, hurt, maybe. Even perturbed. They didn't understand. In this story, we again encounter that important phrase we find many times regarding Jesus's life, and that is, after 3 days. Mary and Joseph do not find their son until after 3 days. That means that while they fearfully scour the town as any good parent would do, their son is in the temple, which is symbolic, which is a vessel for the holy on earth, like the sanctuary of our worship, asking questions of learned men. And young Jesus's wisdom amazes these scholars, wakes them up to the powerful way that he speaks. How can someone so young carry the wisdom of the ages? After 3 days. This is the length of time that later on Jesus remains in the wilderness, put to the test by Satan, and emerges from these tests to begin his ministry. This is the length of time Jesus lies dead in the tomb before he is resurrected. It also calls to mind Jonah's 3 days in the aquatic cavern of the belly of the whale. Well, in my research, I knew that there was a connection, but I thought I want to know more. So in my research on the significance of these 3 days, I found painstaking, and I might say, what's the word for tedious? Yeah, tedious. Painstaking, tedious definitions, explanations for why it is correct to say that Jesus spent 3 days in the tomb. You know, when Good Friday and Easter Sunday are only a day apart, right? But nothing in my research connected me to this 3-day theme, to the many other events in Jesus's life when his soul and his spirit had to incubate or ferment in a spiritual vessel. Whether it's the tomb, whether it's the temple, whether it's, what else? I can't even think. I should know better than to be spontaneous. But up in the wilderness, he sits and he prays in the early morning, this incubation of the spiritual light. 3 days in the temple is connected to his death resurrection theme, the one that grounds the gospel renditions of the life of Jesus. If you pull apart Marc, the Gospel of Marc, I remember my Greek professor telling me, Marc is constantly just heading to the cross. You know, Jesus's story is all about heading to the cross. In today's story, in the temple's dark spaces for 3 days, this young soul who to his parents seems lost and in danger of his life is not only not lost, but is in the process of being renewed in life and light and renewing this to his spiritual elders. As many great poets and literary giants have spoken about so eloquently, our children are not just products of our upbringing. Y'all think about that very much? I mean, we certainly want to think it's true when everything's going real great. Oh, look what I did, huh? But they have their own gifts and their own destiny, and it is our role to protect them in their youthful vulnerability and to launch them into life with respect for themselves and others, an openness of heart to beauty and compassion, with a love for knowledge and awe for things of both heaven and earth. It is our role not to get in the way of their unique sensibilities and their genius, but to expose them to great things in life and to your recognition of those as great things. People say, I want my children to make their own decisions, so I don't have them come to church. And I'm like, how can they make their decision if you don't bring them to a place where they're experiencing something? They're not going to get it at the mall. The wisdom of a child, though expressed with only a rudimentary understanding of life and vocabulary, has an innocence and simplicity of expression which has astounded parents throughout time. Can you believe he said that? There's an old soul. Oh, that's a soul that's been here before. Mary and Joseph are obviously astounded, waking up to a presence in their young child, which they know they are not privy to. They don't understand it. A presence which allows this boy, even at so young an age, to connect his life on earth with its origin and its destiny in the heavens. The words of White Eagle and The Way of the Sun suggest this connection quite beautifully. And I like going outside our tradition into another tradition to see some of this. In our life on earth, in the woods and by the running river where we lived with our people, we found that intense peace and happiness which you in your present life often miss. We advise you when you are troubled in mind to walk in your garden, walk over the soft turf, look at the blades of grass. They are part of you because you are part of God. You could not live without the sun or the water or the air or the earth, nor can you live spiritually without bridging the gap by the senses of your soul. This is what humanity needs: light, sun, air, water, and the stimulation of all the gifts of the soul, for the soul is humanity's bridge between earth and heaven. We read from the wisdom tradition today. The first passage was from one of the books which contains the wisdom tradition. In this one, in ancient Hebrews, today's scripture, it was in Proverbs, and Chokmah here is personified as female. This personification of wisdom existed before the world began and is really a primordial point of creation from which all knowledge and all knowable reality originates. She calls us to herself and asks us to seek and to treasure this never fully knowable gift from God. Curiously, the term Chokmah also refers to, and I love this, I hope you get this, and maybe you guys can give me some insight into it. The term Chokmah, which we've talked about as wisdom, we think of it as maybe intellectual or something like that, whatever that means, also refers to the mastery of crafts in stone and wood and fabric, in dream interpretation, in diplomacy, and in other crafts. Why should this surprise us, really? We have seen in those who express their genius not in words, but in the construction of their art and craft, their photography, their pottery, their artistry. I'm just looking all over this room, and it's just almost to a person. You are a craftsperson. We have seen in those who express their genius not in words, but in the construction of their art and craft, a bodily knowing that is quite mysterious and profound. This expression of Chokmah brings to mind the artist in our congregation who presented their art in worship a couple Sundays ago, or maybe it was just last Sunday. I also think of phenomenal athletes whose movements have the harmony of music and art. And Mr. Grigsby, you and I have talked about that with some of the beauty of athleticism in your family. And musicians like young Mozart, whose Chokmah was manifest at the piano. I think of one of our own, Howard Brown, an archer, whose dexterity and artistry with bow and arrow went far beyond practice makes perfect. His capacity displayed a deep bodily wisdom. The movement of his body was so in sync with his vision and his relationship to the physical world around him that his aim was, well, astounding. The words of a Celtic priest, John O'Donoghue, in his poem Fluent, speaks of the wisdom of a river in a few carefully chosen words. 4 lines, listen to this. I would love to live like a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. I would love to live as a river flows, carried by the surprise of its own unfolding. What a beautiful wish for a parent to have for their children, that they may be carried by the surprise of their own unknowing. We cannot take wisdom into our heads like so much dry knowledge. We must experience it like a river, flow with it, let it carry us, change course with its course, dodge its rocks, feel its sustenance, sink and swim within it. At the end of our gospel story today of Jesus as a boy, we get an inkling that Mary is beginning to catch on. We learn that she treasured all these things in her heart. We are told that Jesus increased in wisdom as he increased in years, and that he came to be more and more in divine and human favor. Well, this is the last Sunday of 2021, another difficult and for many tragic year in the life of the world. So many losses, so much discord, so much ugliness of heart, and yet at the end of each year, here at First United, we have much that we hold on to and that we treasure in our hearts, not least of which all the many souls, the individuals making up this church family who we've known and loved over the years. In their wisdom, in their chokmah, we witnessed and witness still an expression of joy and purpose. In their wisdom, they were able to come to understand what is essential for a full and sacred life. Well, Byron Flatlin has offered us something today. Byron retrieved this historical compilation of images of many members from the past who have passed on, have moved away, or completely grown up. Today, after worship, we invite you to stay for a few moments. We have a TV monitor set up in the foyer, and we have, it's just, and you'll show it on Zoom as well. Thank you. So today, okay, that's all I got.